Even bringing the worst movie to the big screen is the result of a ton of blood, sweat and tears being spilled by committed, if not talented, craftsfolk looking to earn an honest wage. And while actors tend to be relatively diplomatic towards their fellow cast members when discussing their failed projects, every so often they'll be bothered enough to pipe up and admit that somebody else on set was to blame for the critical and/or commercial flop. Whether these actors feel that their co-stars were patently unprofessional by creating an antagonistic on-set environment, brought too much personal baggage to the table, or were simply miscast, in each example a clear case is made for why these films failed as spectacularly as they did. Granted, it takes an extremely talented director to make something compelling out of a dud script, so in all honesty, there's probably a fair share of blame to go around. With that in mind, I'm Ellie with Whatculture, here with 9 actors who blamed their co-stars for movie flops. Number 9. Taran Edon blamed the Kevin Spacey scandal, Billionaire Boys Club. Don't feel bad if you haven't heard of Billionaire Boys Club, because despite the 2018 crime drama starring the likes of Taran Edon, Ansel Elgort and Kevin Spacey, the film's release was violently torpedoed by the pervasive sexual misconduct allegations levelled against Spacey in late 2017. A larger theatrical rollout was consequently cancelled, with the film ultimately releasing in just 10 US cinemas, while simultaneously being dumped direct to VOD. As a result, it recouped just $2.7 million of its $15 million budget at the box office. In a post-release interview, Spacey's co-star Taran Edon blamed the film's failure on the actor's scandalous behaviour, saying, "It's sad that his professional demise threw such a shadow over our film." Granted, its mere 7% rating on the Tomatometer suggests that the film was doomed regardless, but the unmistakable stink of Spacey's involvement ensured it was dead on arrival commercially as well as critically. Number 8. Julia Roberts called Nick Nolte the worst actor I've ever worked with. I Love Trouble. The aptly named 1994 rom-com I Love Trouble starred Julia Roberts and Nick Nolte as competing reporters who, you guessed it, end up falling for one another. Despite being written, directed and produced by the hugely successful team of Nancy Meyers and Charles Shire, the film was slammed by critics for Julia Roberts and Nick Nolte's lack of chemistry, and it only scarcely recouped its ridiculous $45 million budget. Nolte went on the record to call it the worst film he has ever been involved with, confessing that he only did it for the money and felt that he had sold his soul by appearing in it. Reports emerged in the years following the film's release that the two stars loathed one another during shooting, with the pair even acting out many scenes opposite stand-ins because they couldn't stand to be on set with one another. When discussing the film's failure, Roberts pointed to her co-star Nolte, referring to him as not only disgusting, but also deeming him to be the worst actor she's ever worked with. Slightly more diplomatically, Nolte simply said that she's not a nice person. Number 7. Charlie Hunnam blamed a miscast co-star, King Arthur: Legend of the Sword. Guy Ritchie's 2017 King Arthur reboot attempted to reinvent the legendary IP as a mega-budget tentpole, armed with a $175 million budget and an all-star cast. But between disappointing reviews on the film's failure to even recoup its budget, plans for a King Arthur cinematic universe were quickly put on ice. Though critics blamed its failure on both Guy Ritchie's flimsy execution and a general audience disinterest in seeing King Arthur updated, star Charlie Hunnam has offered up his own assessment on who was responsible for its flopping. In a recent interview, Hunnam pointed towards a miscast actor, whose dignity he spared by not naming them. Nevertheless, he said, "There was a piece of miscasting that ended up crippling the central storyline that's actually not in the film anymore." Given that reports emerged in early 2016 that Guy Ritchie wasn't happy with Annabelle Wallis's performance as resistance soldier Maggie in the film and was significantly cutting it back, that would certainly make a lot of sense. After all, despite being a well-known actress by this point in time, her role is bizarrely small in the final cut of the movie. And if Hunnam is correct in his claims, her performance being ill-suited to the movie resulted in Ritchie scrambling to piece together a coherent narrative without her in post-production. Yikes. Number 6. Patton Oswalt called out Wesley Snipes' on-set behaviour, Blade Trinity. The third entry into the Blade franchise was both the worst reviewed and lowest grossing of the franchise, failing to double its $65 million budget and actually turn a profit. Though most of the cast and crew have kept relatively quiet about the movie in the years since its release, supporting cast member Patton Oswalt gave a now legendary interview in 2012 where he detailed how Wesley Snipes' insane behaviour created a hostile work environment. He said, "Wesley was just effing crazy in a hilarious way. He wouldn't come out of his trailer and he only did 4 close-ups. Everything else was done by his stand-in. I only did 1 scene with him." This goes a way to explain why so much of the final film is so choppily edited, with the majority of Blade Trinity's action sequences featuring little of Snipes' own face. According to Oswalt and others, Snipes and director David S. Goyer were at odds throughout production, with Goyer resorting to hiring a gang of bikers to pretend to be his security, while Snipes tried to goad Goyer into quitting the movie. By the end of shooting, Snipes would only communicate with the director through post-it notes, which he would sign "From Blade." To cement just how detrimental Snipes was to the film being completed, Oswalt added, "If you sit and watch Blade Trinity, it's a D-. It just doesn't work. But if you know what they went through to get that movie made, it's an A+. The fact that movie exists puts it above Citizen Kane." Number 5. Ben Affleck blamed his relationship with Jennifer Lopez, Gigli. 2003's Razzie-winning comedy Gigli is frequently cited as one of the worst films ever made, a bizarre attempt to shape a crime caper narrative around the real-life relationship of Ben Affleck and Jennifer Lopez, or as the media dubbed them at the time, Bennifer. Gigli was destroyed by critics and won 6 Razzies for Worst Picture, Worst Director, Worst Screenplay, Worst Actor, Worst Actress, and perhaps most embarrassingly of all, Worst Screen Couple for Affleck and Lopez. Worse still, it didn't even recoup 10% of its unfathomably large $75 million budget and marked the start of a major career downturn for Affleck. In recent years, Affleck has spoken out about Gigli's failure in particular, claiming that the film became such a big target for the press because of the at-the-time relationship with J-Lo. Affleck said, "It could have been a bad movie no one cared about. Angelina Jolie had a bad movie that year and nobody cared. But because I was dating Jennifer Lopez, that made it a big effing deal, you know? And not only is it a bad movie, but they're dating each other in the bad movie." 5 months after Gigli's release, Affleck broke up with Lopez, reportedly due to his discomfort with the intense media scrutiny surrounding their relationship. Number 4. Tyrese criticized James Franco's method acting, Annapolis. 2006 drama Annapolis was controversial upon release for marketing itself as a broader war movie, only for the final product to actually be centered on a freaking boxing tournament. As a result, the film failed to claw back even its modest $26 million budget, and critics were quick to pan it into oblivion, largely blaming its dull plot and uninteresting performances. Reports later emerged that stars James Franco and Tyrese Gibson feuded during production, with Gibson eventually admitting that he took issue with Franco's intense method acting. Franco's desire to land real punches on Gibson resulted in the two getting into an unscripted fight, which, according to Gibson, caused production to be shut down for an entire day. While this antagonism could have theoretically made their on-screen animosity seem more real, Tyrese saw things differently. He said, "I never want to work with him again, and I'm sure he feels the same way. It felt very personal." To Franco's credit, he did admit that his steadfast commitment to method acting cast an unpleasant pall over the set. He said, "I take full blame for any problems on that film. If Tyrese had a bad experience working with me, I was probably a jerk. I was not purposely cruel to him, but I was probably so wrapped up in my performance that I was not as friendly as I could have been. I think Tyrese is a sweet guy with a good heart. I wish him all the best." Number 3. James Dean called out Lindsay Lohan's childish unprofessionalism, The Canyons. 2013 erotic thriller The Canyons was directed by the legendary Paul Schrader and written by author Bret Easton Ellis, and intended to serve as something of a comeback vehicle for Lindsay Lohan to prove once and for all her true acting prowess. But between the predominantly negative reviews and it scarcely recouping its mere $250,000 budget, the film quickly came and went without making a peep. Both before and after the film's release, much press was devoted to Lohan's unreliable behaviour, both on set and during the press tour, which she failed to attend due to her sobriety issues. Eventually, Lohan's co-star porn actor James Dean chimed in on working with Lohan and claimed that she was far tougher to deal with than the co-stars in his regular line of work. Dean said, "There were days when she would scream and yell and cry and refuse to come out. In porn, I'm used to working with professionals who are courteous to others, but Lindsay was like a child lashing out." Lohan's behaviour has been corroborated by many who worked on the film, including director Schrader, and while the argument can be made that The Canyons was always doomed, Lohan constantly sandbagging the production with her tantrums couldn't have helped anyone get a satisfactory movie made, especially at this price point. Number 2. Kelly McGillis hated working with Peter Weller, Cat Chaser. The 1989 crime thriller Cat Chaser starred Peter Weller and Kelly McGillis in an adaptation of Elmore Leonard's novel of the same name. Yet despite starring 2 name actors, the film languished in post-production hell before finally being released direct to VHS, where it received heavily mixed notices. Though Cat Chaser has largely faded into obscurity in the 3+ decades since its release, all the actors have all openly discussed the production. Especially vocal was McGillis, who called it the most hateful experience of her life, adding that on the last day of shooting she went into her trailer, shaved her head and said to the mirror, "Screw you, I never want to act again." True to her word, McGillis took several years away from the spotlight, never regaining the industry foothold she once had. Numerous reports have since confirmed that McGillis and Weller clashed during the shoot, though Weller himself claims he never found out the reason why McGillis had so much of an issue with him. In a comment that was widely interpreted to be referring to Weller, McGillis said of her decision to step back from the industry, "I just don't want to work with assholes anymore." Though McGillis herself has never publicly outlined her reasons for butting heads with Weller, various crew members pointed to Weller's commitment to method acting, which created really bad tension on set. Several crew members acknowledged that Weller's refusal to break character proved irritating, with the second assistant director hilariously adding, "Even asking him what he wanted for lunch was like a project." Cinematographer Anthony B. Richmond also confirmed that Weller didn't treat McGillis well during the shoot. He said, "I don't think Peter was respectful of her. The sex scene with her and Peter was the last thing we shot in Puerto Rico, and something happened during that scene. I mean, he made some horrible remarks to her about what he might catch, something like that." Number 1. Amy Hill called working with Mike Myers a nightmarish experience. The Cat in the Hat. 2003's The Cat in the Hat kickstarted the mighty Mike Myers' live-action downfall, with the astronomically over-budgeted $109 million Dr. Seuss adaptation bombing at the box office, as well as receiving major critical scorn in addition to a stack of Razzie nominations. As talented as Mike Myers obviously is, he has a pervasive reputation for being a difficult personality on sets, and back in 2016, Myers' co-star Amy Hill detailed her nightmarish experience working with Myers on The Cat in the Hat. Hill played the supporting character of Mrs. Kwan and said, "I'd be there at the crack of dawn waiting. We would all be waiting for Mike Myers to come. He had his handlers dress his trailer and his area was all covered with tenting because he didn't want anybody seeing him. It was so weird. It was just a horrible, nightmarish experience. I don't think he got to know anybody. He'd just be with his people and walk away. People would come and then he'd stand there. There was a guy who held his chocolates in a little Tupperware. Whenever he needed chocolate, he'd come running over and give him a chocolate. That's what divas are like, I guess, or people who need therapy." Needless to say, that's hardly the way to establish the fun, free-wheeling mood necessary to make an entertaining family comedy. So it's little surprise the end result was such a miserable dud.